I'd like to welcome you all back to the channel. I have with me here today Ari Lesser. All right, let's start from the beginning. Where did you grow up?
I'm from Cleveland, Ohio. Grew up in Cleveland Heights, and from a fairly unaffiliated family. Grew up with almost no Jewish observance in my life. We'd go visit our cousins in Baltimore for Passover every once in a while, but for the first decade or so, that was about it. And only after that, my mom started going to a Reconstructionist synagogue, and so that was my first exposure to doing like a Shabbat dinner or just some of the basic stories of the Torah, but very little in general, very little exposure to Judaism, during my early life. And Cleveland's a nice place. I still live here. That's where I am right now, and it has a wonderful Jewish community, but I just wasn't really a part of it. We we were, I went to public school and didn't have much connection to the broader Jewish community until high school. So in high school, um, I'd been going to a public school. My parents thought it wasn't challenging enough for me, so they wanted me to go to some, private. They gave me some choices. They're like, you need to go to this like, sort of prep school that gets kids ready for Ivy League stuff and a bunch of like rich snobby kids, whatever. Or you can go to this experimental Jewish school it's like non-denominational,
Gotcha.
and those are my two choices. I couldn't they wouldn't let me stay in public school. So I was like, well, I definitely don't want to go to the other school. I'll try out the Jewish school. So I went to this, it was called Pardes, and it was a startup. So they only had 25 students when I went there. And there was kids who were like me, who were pretty unaffiliated, but there was also kids that were, raised from birth that just didn't quite fit in the Orthodox schools in the area, and so they were also trying this out. So it was cool because those were my first friends who were really in the Orthodox community, which over here is Beechwood, is where there's the biggest Shabbos observant community here. So once I made friends there, even though I was not at all religious, I started to go hang out with them on Shabbat, and I loved it. I really liked the vibe of what Jews do on Shabbat. Everyone is off work, everyone's hanging out, people are just going into each other's houses without knocking, and there's just food everywhere, and
Right.
like, high school kids can easily get some l'chaims when no one's looking. I mean, it was a good scene.
That's awesome, man.
So uh I I was like, yeah, I even got to the point I was like telling my parents, we got to go move over to Beechwood. It's like that's where the party's at. Let's go. Let's go over there.
That's
But even
funny.
even at that point, I wasn't really so interested in Torah or Yiddishkeit, which didn't come until quite a bit later.
So what I was gonna ask you is, how did you discover your talent, and how did it re evolve into a religion thing? You mentioned briefly something about Tehillim, about Psalms,
Oh,
as
so
your beginning point. And
sure.
just before, one more question to tie it together, and then you give me the whole skinny on it.
Mhm.
Is rapping and spirituality one and the same to you? And go.
Okay. So the beginnings of the rapping. So after that school, that Jewish school that I went to, unfortunately, it didn't work out. They didn't get enough students, and they had to close
L'chaims.
down after
They
two
didn't get
years.
enough l'chaims.
They didn't get enough l'chaims. No, they didn't. They didn't get enough students, and they just didn't have the funding. And so I was there for my freshman and sophomore years, but then they closed down, and I went back to public school for the rest of high school. And it's the same public school I had started out in, so I had a lot of friends just from growing up there. And and it's called Cleveland Heights High, and it's about 80% African American, probably. So everybody everybody in the school was listening to hip hop. That's just the music that was um was in the hallways. It was everywhere. And there's some great hip hop that comes out of Cleveland, local stuff, but also it was a good age of hip hop, the early 2000s, and everyone's still listening to 90s hip hop, some of the great classic stuff. So I got into hip hop there when I was the end of high school. And the first time I tried my hand at it, I had a substitute teacher during biology class, and we were just not learning anything. So I just decided I'm just gonna, as a joke, I decided I'd write a Jewish gangster rap in biology class.
That's great.
And I wrote this rap. Just, it took me 30 minutes maybe just sitting there. And I shared it with my friends after class, and they're all like, "Man, that was hard. That was tight." They were so into it. They loved it. And they gave me such props that it gave me a lot of confidence. Like, man, if they like this thing, I only spent like half an hour on this. If I went home and just sat down and thought about this for a while, I could do way better than that. And looking back, that initial song I wrote, I mean, it was terrible. It was not a good song.
Oh,
So,
really?
um, like I would never do that for sure. It's not appropriate and not just not very well written. But that initial positive feedback from my friends gave me the motivation to kind of keep at it. And it was not a spiritual thing at the time at all. It was really, it was much more of a entertainment thing. Like it was entertaining for me to do. I've always liked to make people laugh, so that's a big part of it. Is I like to work humor into everything. So I um I just saw this is such a great outlet to express myself and to make people smile, make people happy. And I kept at it. I kept writing songs throughout high school, and then when I went to college, continued writing more stuff. I'm a political science major, so I started writing lots of political stuff, which not as funny, although sometimes making fun of politicians is good. And uh, kept doing that all through college. I started to get gigs locally, doing things on campus, and then I really um, found my calling when I went to the music festivals in the summer. I was on the West Coast. I went to University of Oregon, and on the West Coast, they pretty much like there's music festivals going on almost every weekend during the summer. So I started to learn the circuit, and I at first would just go with my friends, to attend festivals, but then I realized, I actually had more fun performing than watching other people perform. So I'd go around in the campground, the parking lot, and just rap and sell CDs. A lot of times I wouldn't even buy a
Wow.
ticket to the festival. I'd just go to go and hang out in the campground because it was more fun. I had more fun out there than I did at the show.
That's
And
wild.
started to do pretty well. Every weekend I'd make a few $100, or at a big festival, maybe even like $1,000, just selling CDs, and really started to see, I could actually do this, as a profession, not just a hobby.
Right.
People are actually paying me to do this.
Right.
And after a year or two of that, some of the festival organizers, got word about what I was doing, and so I actually started to get booked to usually do emceeing stuff because I was like a solo act and I could entertain without any music. It was useful since they had bands going all day, but it takes 20, 25 minutes to break down one band, set up another band, and it's just dead time that they wanted to fill with something. So they'd bring me in, and I'd come throughout the day, and I just between each band go up and just do a few songs to keep people entertained while they're setting up and breaking down.
Wow.
And yeah, did that for the 4 years of college. Every summer I would do a lot of music festivals, and that helped me get over any issues of stage fright or any issues of
Right.
confidence. Just going up to random people in a campground and rapping for them, or going on stage. Because I would be performing for these crowds, they weren't there for me. They're there for these other artists. So sometimes they were huge crowds. For example, I did a set in between, you know, two bands. The second one was Lauryn Hill. I don't know if you've heard of Lauryn Hill, but She's huge.
Sure.
So there's 15,000 people there to see her, but I'm there
Yeah.
doing my thing, in front of a crowd of 15,000 people. So it's like after you've done that, it's just like, everything else feels pretty easy. It feels pretty, you know, low pressure, low stakes.
That's amazing. Wow.
um, and it, but at this point, still, even though I was writing things that were very conscious and positive, and I like to think thought provoking, it was not yet religious in any way.
Right.
Spiritual, for sure, spiritual. I've always been a spiritual
Your
person.
stuff was always spiritual.
Yeah, I always believed in God. Although my conception of God was more of like a oneness, I'd say, than it was a sentient being. Um, but definitely was always a spiritual person. I don't know about always, kids are sometimes a little bit simple, but once I got into my teenage and early adult years, I was always seeking truth and seeking connection. And what happened that connected me to Judaism was a little bit of a circuitous, roundabout way. I was at one of these festivals in Northern California, and a guy from Los Angeles bought one of my CDs. And that later that week, he called me up and said, I bought one of your CDs at Earth Dance, it was called, the festival. I love your lyrics, but the production quality on your CD is terrible. I mean, you got to do better than this. So, what do you say? How about we go into business? I'll
You
finance
stick
the
with what you're
project.
good at, and he'll stick with what he's good at.
Yeah, he's like, I'll finance a project. I know a lot of great musicians here in LA. Come down here, and we'll make a new CD and make an album. So it was perfect timing for me because I just graduated from college. It was the summer after my senior year, and I was kind of deciding what my next step was going to be. And so this was just an obvious opening. So I went down to LA, and turns out the guy he was a Rastafarian, which, yeah, I don't know if you're familiar, but Rastafarians,
For sure.
they're I guess you could say their Rebbe, the guy who they see as their Rebbe, is the Emperor of Ethiopia, this guy Haile Selassie, and they think he's a direct descendant of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. So because of that, they're really into anything that has to do with the Davidic dynasty specifically. So he flies me down there. The guy he his business was he owned a medical marijuana dispensary, and turns out he was actually going to be putting me up in the dispensary. So I was like sleeping in the patient's lounge at the medical marijuana dispensary.
Nice.
So 10 a.m. they'd be like, "Wake up, we got customers coming in." And during the day, I'd go to the studio, and he put together some really great reggae artists that I got to work with. Bob Marley's former drummer, Santa Davis. The top producer who was kind of in charge of the whole project was named Paul Fakuri, who he actually did the Miseducation of Lauryn Hill, was one of maybe his biggest project, but he did an album for Stephen Marley and Damian Marley. And the guy is just, he's very at the time for sure the most skilled musician I'd ever met. And it was amazing just to see him working in the studio, how quickly and efficiently he could put stuff together. And he could play every instrument too. I mean, he'd just be like, "Oh, hand me the guitar." He lay down like the guitar. He's like, "Okay, now the bass." Okay,
Wow.
now like and then he'd layer like four things together, and then he'd be like, "Okay, now play it back." And then you know we'd all hear it for the first time and be like, "How did you do that?" He was already hearing it in his head, but um
That's
it was
crazy.
amazing. I saw him put together a whole track in like literally 5-10 minutes, that he would put
Wow.
together, and it would barely have to change it because it was just banging already. It was just on point. Um, so anyways, when when I wasn't in the studio, we were back at the dispensary. They call it Liberty Bell Temple, Rastafarian ministry over there. And they had when you come in the door, they had a table with like 35 different kinds of marijuana on the desk, different price ranges. But on the two corners of the table, they had stacks of Psalms and Proverbs, just English translations of Psalms and Proverbs that they would give out to everybody who came. They try to get them to take a book of Psalms and Proverbs, because really, as much as some Rastafarians are into the whole, Old Testament, or some of them are into the New Testament, but really their favorite stuff is the Psalms and Proverbs. That's like their go to jams. And I knew that Psalms and Proverbs are from Jewish tradition. I had enough of a awareness about my own, culture to know that. And I started flipping through. I started flipping through the books just to see what they're all about. And I had done, I guess, I sort of had a conception of the Psalms. I think a lot of people do. When you hear Psalms, the first word that pops into your mind usually is hallelujah, right? It's like praise God. And certainly that's part of the Psalms, is those praise. We got the whole section, the hallelujahs we say every day at the end of, or during Psukkah de Zimra, 145 to 150. But when you really start to read through the whole book of Psalms, it's actually just a tiny fraction of what's there. And really, most of it is much darker, I'd say, and heavier. And King David, he had a hard life. He had a lot of intense, painful moments, and really life-threatening situations. Many times his life was in danger. And that all comes across in the Psalms. And so when you really start to dive into it, you see that actually there's many, many times where the themes that are going on in Psalms are similar to what you might see in gangster rap, right? You got enemies around you. You got, you're in a bad neighborhood. You're surrounded by lions, and there's liars, and there's people who are trying to kill you, and you can't trust anybody. And it's like all these themes that you see them over and over again. And I got the idea, these would make pretty cool raps. If I could just turn these psalms into
Right.
raps, people would dig this. And
Definitely.
I had done similar projects in the past where I'd taken historical works and translated them into rhyme. So, for example, I'd taken the Declaration of Independence and translated it to make it rhyme. Or I'd taken Martin Luther King's speech and translated it to make it rhyme. And I figured this would be another cool historical project. Take a 3,000-year-old song, and make it into a gangster rap. And I'm sure people will like. Everybody likes the Psalms. It's the Jews, Christians. People are into this stuff. But when I started, it wasn't so much a religious project. It was a historical project.
Interesting.
Yeah, and
I
I
bet a
so I
lot of
started,
people don't know that about you.
well, that's the beginnings. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. So when I started working with it, I was in LA, and I started doing like one psalm a day, and I just sit down with it, and I'd go verse by verse and just try to make it rhyme in English. Maybe I should do one so you guys get a sense of
Sure.
what I'm talking about. Do you have a favorite psalm, or any
Um,
something from
there's
something from
there's so
Dominic?
many, but quite honestly, I mean, I think that the first one is so close to home for me.
Um, let's see, the first one. I have an old version of it. Let me see if I can find it. Um, I've written, at this point, I went through the whole book. I got up through like the first 100 psalms, um, and I kind of decided that my translations were not accurate enough, because I was working off that initial. Um,
All
so
right.
let's see, Psalm 1. This is like an old version of this, from 2009. Like, Bless the man who walks not in the ways of those who mock and sin. The Lord's law is his delight. He thinks about it day and night. He's like a tree beside a river that yields fruit and does not wither. While wind blows away like straw, the wicked who ignore the law. Sinners are cast out of sight. They cannot stand in judgment's light. Only the righteous does God cherish. The way of the wicked will soon perish. So that's working off of a, you know, that's before I started working off the actual Hebrew text. Let's see if I can find a newer version, because a lot of the Psalms I've actually done multiple versions of them as I got better at understanding biblical Hebrew and realized that my initial translations weren't so good actually. So some of them I've probably done 4 or 5 translations of the same exact psalm. The ones that I'm, nowadays what I'm focusing on more is the Siddur itself, because those are the ones that we do every day or at least every Shabbos. And so they end up being a little bit more well known. And also I end up singing them more often, because the ones that I don't sing very often, I end up not being able to remember them. That's
Right.
sort of, I don't practice. So my practice uh, is singing, basically. That is how I practice.
Gotcha.
Let's,
Um, Let me ask you a question.
yeah.
Do you find it strange how mainstream has taken to you, though you're so like seemingly nonconformist, you have a style of your own?
Well, mainstream what?
I
Mainstream
don't know,
Jews?
the whole Jewish world, the yeshiva world, the regular run of the mill guy.
Yeah. Well, what I think, my focus has always been on creating quality content, right? I spend very little time marketing, if any. Like, the marketing I do is I just post the song. That is the marketing I do. And my philosophy has always been, if you create a quality product, you don't have to sell it. People want it. And especially when it comes to, the stuff that I do with the Torah, I really care about accuracy. I want, first and foremost, when I'm translating these things, I want to learn them. I want to embed this information in my head. And if it's not accurate, then I'm not learning anything. So I think one of the reasons that the mainstream Jewish, Orthodox world has taken to what I do is that they know the real stuff better than anybody else. They know the authentic, text. They know the text. They know what the Torah says. And when they hear me doing songs that are really staying true to the text and giving over like the actual stories as they have come down to us, they appreciate that, because so many people have bastardized our stories and twisted our stories and given such, I think, false narratives about our stories. I saw the movie. There was a major motion picture, Noah, right? The movie Noah. I couldn't.
Right.
I couldn't stand it. They just made
Yeah.
up all this random stuff. They made Noah look like a murderer. I mean, it was like a nutso. It was crazy
Right.
stuff. Like
Right.
that. I can't stand that. I can't stand it. And especially, when you don't need to do that. The stories are already so good. They're already so deep.
Right.
It's like once you twist it and you change it, you lose the meaning. You lose the depth to it.
Right. I always said somebody should come out with a series on the Bible and make movies on it, and it would just be amazing. I mean, like Samson,
Yeah. Yeah.
like
And
instead of
I don't,
Hercules, we have our own Hercules, you know?
right. I mean, I always say I want to get like Quentin Tarantino to direct the movie about Shimshon, right? Wouldn't that be
That'd
epic?
be
And
that'd be
he's just
funky. That'd
killing
be totally
Philistines
cool.
left and right. It's like this brutal, like one man
Right.
versus entire
And
army.
hold on to that um picture of him as a righteous person all throughout. It
Yeah.
would be really, really cool. Yeah.
Right, right. In Quentin Tarantino directing it, but it's all informed by the actual text, by the actual tradition, by the actual stories. It's not, utilize all the tricks that mainstream media has, all the special effects, but utilize it in a way that that enhances the truth. It doesn't change it, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Um, Let me ask you another question. You ready for the
Sure.
next one?
Sure.
Um, do you find that the more religious you get, the more difficult it is for you to follow the people that would be your inspiration? Or no matter how religious you get, you would still follow that inspiration if it's even if it's not within the, realm of what might be acceptable at that level of your religion.
So what I'll say is my biggest inspiration comes from King David. I mean, he is my biggest inspiration. I didn't really finish, but like with the Psalms, once I started getting more and more into the Psalms, I realized that as opposed to every song I had written, I was writing songs for the audience, for the crowd, for the people. And for the most part, King David's songs, which I was now translating, he's writing them to God, like direct communication to God. And as I'm rehearsing these translations that I'm writing of his words, all of a sudden I'm talking to God, basically.
Right.
And the more I did it, the more I really started to feel very tangibly that God was listening to me. Right? It wasn't just a show for the crowd. It's like there's something to this whole thing. And there's a reason why King David wrote these songs 3,000 years ago and we're all still singing them today because there's real power there. There's real connection. Um, and unlike most of the Tanakh, which is third person, you're like looking down on the story. Tehillim is like you're first person, you're stepping into King David's shoes and you are having these conversations with God. So it just opened me up to the whole world of prayer and davening and connection, and communication to God and thinking about God as a being that isn't just um, passive, but is actually a present and conscious and sentient entity uh, that I can communicate with, right?
Right.
So that was a major shift for me in life and a big change. And so when you're talking about, getting my inspiration, I don't get much inspiration from modern people, whether it's, you know, musicians or rabbis, almost all my inspiration is coming from the source material. I get into the source material. I love mostly Chumash. Chumash is like the deepest stuff, but for sure Tehillim. And I do Daf Yomi, so I learn some Gemara every day, and Tanya, and um you know those maybe it's just the way I'm wired, but I don't really seek out modern day inspiration. I feel like I have such a massive treasure vault of stuff. Being a Jew, we just have so much that we have access to that I'll never run out basically of inspiration that's just in the tank, from the good old days basically.
Yes. Couldn't agree with you more, man. Absolutely. That's very interesting to hear. I mean, I didn't expect that response, to be honest with you. I thought you were gonna, quote some famous singer or whatever, but that's fascinating, brother.
Yeah,
I love it.
I don't listen to much music at all, actually. I listen to very little music when, I'm usually making music. So it's
Right.
I think one of the reasons that my music has a very, I don't know, I think it has a very, it's easy to identify my music. People will hear it and be like, oh, that's Ari. It's because I'm not listening to somebody and copying them. It's just me. Sometimes it sounds a little like monotonous because it's like the same me. It's always just me. I'm not I'm
Right.
not trying to be somebody else. And primarily what I'm doing is using the music as a vehicle to give over the message. The message is the most important thing. The message, I'm really a word person more than I am a musician. And the music is just It's just a spoonful of sugar to help the medicine go down, really, because the main thing is what's the point? Why am I opening my mouth? Why am I even saying anything?
Get the other person inspired so that they'll connect with God.
Right, right.
That's
Yeah,
awesome.
whether it's through a story or through a davening or through whatever it is, um, I really always start with whenever I start a song, I have like a reason. I have an idea. I have a story that I'm trying to tell. I'm not just trying to put things together that sound nice. It's always like an intention behind it.
Well, that's for sure because you know, we have a saying in Hebrew that roughly translates in English to words that leave the heart enter the heart.
Hmm.
So, you know, if that's the way your audience is taking you, then it's something you can't fake. It's
Yeah,
got to be genuine.
yeah,
So I appreciate it, man. I appreciate your time. This
absolutely.
is really fascinating. I didn't think you would take me down this whole path. I didn't. There's a lot of interesting things that you're sharing with me here, and I appreciate that, man. Thank you so much. Thank you, Ari. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to do it. Glad we got to connect, and look
Yeah.
forward to seeing the episode when it's up.
Thank you. Thank you. That was so thorough, man. I truly appreciate it. Nice meeting you.
You too, Ari.
All right. All right. Take care. Thank you.
Have a good day.
You too. Bye.